And so I take that as a stamp of approval that there's a lot of people who care about freedom, and freedom is still popular. So we will keep going until we have victory. But it is great that these enthusiasm and so much support from the young people. You know, there was one time in the 1960s they used to talk about the young people. They would say that if you were 20 years old and you weren't a liberal, you didn't have a heart. But they also said that if you were 40 and you didn't, and if you weren't a conservative, you didn't have a brain. I say, why can't you have both, a belief in freedom and an option? Something rather amazing is going on, especially here in the last several years. Things have changed quietly and steadily in a positive way. Although over the last 100 years has been pretty much downhill for the cause of the Republic. We have undermined our Republic. But in the last 4 years, something dramatic has happened. There was a campaign 4 years ago. There was a lot of people paying attention. There was a lot of interest. But all of a sudden, something happened. Many of the things that we have been talking about and warning about, especially the Austrian economists, talking about, you know, the danger of printing money and running up debts and doing all these things. And what would happen, we'd have a financial crisis and watch out for the housing bubble. When that came about, all of a sudden the people started saying, you know, that's what these Austrian free market economists have been talking about. Let's talk more to them, and this is what's happening. The people are paying attention. Who would have ever dreamed that 5 or 10 years ago that we would ever make the Federal Reserve an issue in a presidential campaign? It's simple. Just win the election and we'll end the Fed. Actually, next year would be an appropriate year. The Fed's been around for nearly 100 years, 1913, and they've destroyed 98% of the value of the 1913 dollar. So let's not let them do the 2% left. Let's have a bill to repeal the Federal Reserve Act. But it has impressed me very much going to the college campuses and talking to people, how many people now understand exactly what the monetary issue is all about. And they understand by looking at a little bit of history and why the founders warned us about the money issue and why they put into the Constitution that the government, the Congress could not print money. They could only use gold and silver as legal tender. And that's what we should do. Only gold and silver. But of course, we didn't follow those rules, and by the fact that the Federal Reserve can print money and create money at will, and they buy up debt, what do the politicians do when they can accommodate the big spenders? They spend a lot of money, they run up the debt, they tax to the maximum, they borrow to the maximum, then they still don't have enough, and they have this ravenous appetite for big government, so then the Federal Reserve comes in and accommodates the big spenders, and they just print the money, and lo and behold, it destroys the value of the money. Now, some people say that's difficult to understand, but you know, more and more I talk to people in 8th and 9th grade in high school, and they say that's just common sense. You print a lot of money, it's going to lose its value. But it's also the mischief that occurs. Government spending money is one issue. But there's two problems. One, they take the money from us. They may take it directly through taxation. They may put the burden on a later generation by borrowing, but they might just print the money. So it's always a burden by taking it out of the economy, and it undermines our productivity in the economy and be able to produce wealth. But doing that is one thing, but the other half, But we really get punished is when they spend the money. I mean, what good do they come out of when they're spending all this money? They might feel compelled to go start a war that we don't need and get us into trouble that we don't need. That's been a big problem. Matter of fact, the problem as I see it, whether it's the financial, whether it's the foreign policy, or whether it's an attack on our civil liberties, what we have lost here in the last 70 or 80 years is a respect for our Constitution, a respect for our rule of law. So if we got into trouble by allowing our representatives and our presidents to ignore the Constitution and we get into trouble, why wouldn't the solution be only sending people to Washington who read the Constitution, understand this, and lives up to their oath of office? Very simply, that means that we wouldn't have a Federal Reserve System because it's not authorized under the Constitution and it destroys the value of our money. But what about the war issue? Just think of how many wars we've been in since World War II. None of them have been declared. None of them have been won. How many trillions of dollars of wealth has been consumed? How long do we stay in a country and not wake up and say, enough is enough? Well, right now, the American people have awakened, and not only are they looking at the Federal Reserve, but they're saying, we've been in Afghanistan long enough and it's time to come home. War in defense of one's country is proper and necessary, and the President has a responsibility to be Commander-in-Chief. But the President of the United States did not have the authority to start wars without the proper permission coming from the Congress. And even today, we have a President who sent his Secretary of Defense over to the Hill, and Secretary Panetta explained that we don't have to do that. We don't have to get permission. He says that we can get legal permission from the United Nations. And of course, this is how we've gotten ourselves into way too much trouble. But great nations generally are not destroyed by military means. We did not, fortunately, we did not have to have a nuclear exchange with the Soviet Union. I was drafted in 1962. There were missiles in Cuba. And I served five years in the military. But, you know, even under those circumstances of how dangerous it was, you know, at least our president at that time called up Khrushchev and said, maybe we ought to talk this out. And there was an agreement. They take their missiles out of Cuba, and we took our missiles out of Turkey, and we didn't have to fight and kill each other and have a nuclear war. Humble suggestion is, why can't we talk to a country that doesn't even have a nuclear weapon and we can't prove they're building a nuclear weapon? This is what the founders advised. In order to get along in the world, you should offer friendship and trade. The more you trade with a country, the less likely it will be that we will fight them. And this is what we should be doing. Just think how much better off we're doing with Vietnam.
How many
up to 10 minutes,
people did we lose? 60,000?